A man stopped by the store just to grab some water. It was supposed to take 2 minutes, nothing more. But two little girls standing silently by the chocolate aisle changed his life forever. They didn't cry. They didn't beg. They just said they were hungry. And in that moment, Daniel Grayson forgot every rule he'd ever lived by. Because sometimes, one decision from a stranger can rewrite the fate of 3 lives forever. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel. Because here, we don't just tell stories, we touch lives. That morning, Daniel Grayson's day had started just like any other. Back-to-back meetings, strategy calls, aggressive negotiations, just the usual chaos of being the CEO of a major company. Even lunch wasn't really about eating. It was another meeting disguised as a meal. Everything in his life was scheduled, structured, and optimized. Time, discipline, and results, those were his metrics. He didn't believe in luck or coincidences. And emotions? They didn't belong in his calendar. There was no measurable return on investment in feelings. But as he was heading home from work, just as he passed a small corner market, something made him pause. He didn't need anything. Yet, without thinking, he pulled over and stepped inside. Maybe out of habit, just for 2 minutes, just to grab a bottle of water. He was about to turn around when something caught his eye. 2 little girls, standing completely still by the chocolate shelf. They couldn't have been older than 6. Long, curly brown hair that shimmered in the light. But their eyes, that was what really stopped him. Huge, wide, and the most striking blue he'd ever seen. They weren't talking. They weren't touching anything. They were just staring at the chocolate, like it was something sacred, something they were only allowed to look at. Daniel had seen hundreds of kids in grocery stores, crying, begging, throwing tantrums for candy or toys. But not these 2. Their silence wasn't awkward, it was heartbreaking. It was like they had learned not to ask for anything. Even for someone like Daniel, who had long shut off his emotions, something about this moment hit hard. He found himself walking over. And when he spoke, his usual sharp voice came out surprisingly gentle. "Are you girls lost?" The girl on the left, wearing a pale pink sweater with a tear near the sleeve, slowly looked up. Her eyes locked onto his. They didn't blink. And her voice was barely audible. "No, we're just hungry." It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't sad. It was just raw truth. And Daniel had never heard anything hit quite like that before. The other girl, wearing a hoodie way too big for her, just nodded, still staring at the chocolate. Daniel crouched down. He hadn't done that in years. He tried to soften his expression. "Where are your parents?" he asked quietly. This time the girl in the hoodie answered. "They left." Her voice didn't shake, but her little hands clung tightly to the edges of her hoodie. And they were trembling. Daniel's chest tightened. This wasn't just about 2 kids having a rough day. This was something deeper, something darker. He looked around. No adults. No shopping cart. No watchful eyes. They were completely alone. He didn't know why, but he grabbed a shopping basket. He started filling it. Juice, sandwiches, fruit, water, and some chocolate. He packed everything into bags and gently held them out to the girls. They hesitated, like they weren't sure this was real. "It's okay," he said softly, helping them take the bags. "These are for you." Only then did they reach out slowly, like the bags were made of glass. He didn't ask their names. He just walked with them to the checkout, paid silently, and leaned in to whisper to the cashier, "Forget protocol. Just ring it through." By the time they stepped outside, the sun had already set. A breeze was picking up. When one of the girls shivered, Daniel instinctively took off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. Even he was surprised by his own reaction. "Do you have somewhere to go?" he asked. And he knew whatever the answer was, there was no going back for him now. The girl in pink murmured, "Not really. They sent us to a place, but it was bad. So we ran." Daniel looked up at the sky, then down at those 2 small faces. His usual plans, strategies, routines, none of it meant anything anymore. "For tonight," he said slowly, "how about we go somewhere warm?" The girls hesitated. Then, without a word, they both reached out and took his hands, one on each side, and quietly, they started walking with him toward the car. And in that moment, something inside Daniel Grayson cracked. For the first time, he didn't try to stop it. The car ride was quiet, but not in an awkward way, more like peaceful. Daniel kept glancing in the rearview mirror at the 2 little girls buckled into the back seat. They were clutching their paper bags tightly, like if they let go, everything would disappear. Their eyes stared out the window, but their expressions stayed guarded. Daniel didn't try to start a conversation. He had no idea what he'd even say. All his life, words had been tools used to negotiate, convince, win. But tonight, silence said more than enough. This silence held the kind of story no one had bothered to listen to for a long time. When they pulled up to his luxury apartment building, the security guard gave Daniel a respectful nod. The two little girls beside him were clearly not part of his usual image, but no one asked questions. They didn't even make eye contact. That's how well-known and respected Daniel Grayson was. No one dared to challenge him. The elevator ride was just as quiet. As they ascended, their reflections in the mirrored walls kept sneaking glances at one another. And for the first time, Daniel felt something stir in the middle of all that quiet. A warmth that made him uncomfortable. Responsibility. When they reached his apartment, he opened the door to a sleek, elegant, minimalist space. Polished surfaces, cold marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows glowing with city lights. Everything was modern, perfect, and completely childless. Not once had a child's voice echoed in this space. Until now. And suddenly, two pairs of small feet tiptoed inside, as if even their breathing had to be careful not to disturb the balance. Daniel walked to the kitchen and pointed to the island stools. "You can sit here," he said plainly. The girls climbed up slowly. They didn't touch the food right away. They just waited like they were expecting someone to scold them. Then finally, they took the first bite. Slow, cautious, respectful, like every mouthful was being portioned with mathematical precision. Daniel didn't ask them anything. He made himself a cup of tea, and as the steam curled up from the edge of the mug, he realized this might end up being one of the most important nights of his life. Eventually, he sat across from them. This time, his voice was soft. "What are your names?" The girl in pink answered first. Emma. The one in the oversized blue hoodie followed right after. "Sophie, do you know your last name?" Daniel asked gently. Emma nodded slowly. "I think. It's Morgan." The way she said it, unsure, but hopeful. It was like she'd learned a last name was something you could lose. Daniel took note. He'd look it up later in official records. But for now, that wasn't the point. The priority was comfort. After they finished eating, he led them to the guest room. It was spacious, clean, and warm. A room he rarely used, more for show than for guests. But Emma and Sophie curled up on the bed like it had always been theirs. Before turning out the lights, they whispered to each other and leaned in close. Then slowly, they closed their eyes. Daniel stood at the door. He didn't move for a long time. Just watched. Two small bodies breathing under a blanket, in sync. Each rise and fall a quiet rhythm, like the room itself was learning how to breathe. And for the first time in his life, Daniel realized he cared about someone else's breath. And worse, he was terrified of losing it. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat in his office, behind his laptop, searching. He combed through national missing children databases, tried to find a match for Emma and Sophie, checked orphanage reports, foster care files. The things he read hit him like a punch to the stomach. Neglect, abuse, vanished records, terms he'd only ever seen on paper before, cold and detached. Now they had faces, and they were sleeping in the next room. By sunrise, he had made up his mind. He called his lawyer. Laura had been his trusted legal advisor for years. She didn't talk much, but when she did, it mattered. Daniel was direct. "I can't let these girls go back to wherever they came from. I need to know what my options are, what rights I have, what path I can take." Later that morning, Emma and Sophie wandered into the kitchen. Messy hair, sleepy eyes. Daniel placed warm oatmeal in front of them, then asked gently, "Would you two like to stay here for a few days? Just until we figure things out?" Emma looked at Sophie, then gave the smallest nod. "We don't want to go back," she whispered. Daniel didn't make any promises. He just said two simple words. "You won't." And for the first time, those little shoulders relaxed. That morning, for the first time in years, Daniel Grayson didn't wake up to the sound of his alarm. He woke up to the soft shuffle of two tiny pairs of feet sneaking into the kitchen. Emma and Sophie had woken up with the sunrise, whispering gently to each other as they made their way down the hall. Daniel just lay there for a moment, listening. When he peeked into the kitchen and saw them giggling and hugging each other in the morning light, he realized something inside him had quietly opened. They made breakfast together that morning. Eggs, toast, a little fruit. Daniel manned the pan, still not fully awake without his coffee, but for once, there was a softness on his face. Emma carefully arranged sliced apples on the plate like she was designing art, while Sophie gave a passionate speech about why chocolate should be a breakfast food. And as the days passed, Daniel noticed something. These two little girls weren't just in his home, they were creating a rhythm in his life. Each morning now started with the same sweet little questions. Apple or banana? Do you want to pick your pajamas tonight? What book should we read later? And somehow, those simple questions meant more than any of the business reports, stock analyses, or board memos he used to live by. Then, one evening, something long forgotten stirred in his memory. A story his mom used to read to him as a child. He could barely remember the title, but it came back to him. He ordered it online right away. 2 days later, after dinner, they sprawled out on the couch in the living room. Emma leaned her head against his arm. Sophie curled up near his legs. Daniel opened the book and started to read. 1 page, then 2. Emma's eyes began to droop. Sophie's breathing slowed. By the 4th night, the guest room wasn't enough anymore. Emma looked up and asked, "Can we sleep in the same bed?" Daniel didn't even let her finish the sentence. "Yes," he said instantly. That tiny request filled him with something unexpected. It was so simple, so childlike, and yet so deeply human. The need to feel safe, to stay close, to not be alone. The next day, the house started to change. Daniel brought in a therapist named Margaret, a calm, kind woman who didn't push. She just came to draw, play, and sit quietly with the girls. And slowly, laughter returned to the rooms. Emma started drawing again, trees, houses, colorful roads. Sophie hummed little tunes under her breath, quiet but full of hope. Meanwhile, Laura Daniels' longtime lawyer kept working in the background. She checked all the official databases, compared records, scanned missing child reports. Nothing. No match for Emma. No match for Sophie. No reports. No alerts. Nothing. And that was terrifying, because it meant that maybe no one was even looking for them. Maybe their parents had left them on purpose, and maybe the system had let them vanish without ever noticing. Daniel didn't tell the girls. Instead, he thought about what he could give them. Security, routine, a kind of peace even in the quiet. Same time breakfast every morning. Same bedtime story every night. Pajamas picked out with care. Sophie liked the blue ones. Emma always chose green. They decorated the bathroom mirror with little star stickers. Started creating their own corners of the house. One afternoon, Daniel saw a tiny kid-sized piano in a bookstore. He remembered the way Sophie's eyes lit up the other day when she tapped the keys on a toy keyboard. On his way home, he bought it, placed it gently in the corner of the living room. That night, Sophie pressed a few notes with her fingertips, then turned to Emma with a smile that lit up her whole face. Emma, in turn, started decorating the bookshelves with paper flowers. The house no longer felt like a building. It felt like it was alive. Then one evening, as Daniel was reading a report in his office, Emma walked in. She stopped at the doorway and just stood there. After a while, she asked, "Do you work a lot?" Daniel looked up, a little surprised. "I used to," he said honestly. Emma nodded slowly. "We don't really like it when people disappear," she said quietly, then turned and walked out, leaving only silence behind. Daniel didn't move for a long time. It was the first time anyone had said something about his past, but not as an accusation, just as a truth. That night, Daniel made himself a promise. No matter what happens, he would never disappear again. The morning after the custody decision felt different. The city hadn't changed. It was still crowded, chaotic, always in a rush. But Daniel's home? It was filled with a quiet kind of victory. There was no more fear. No more little girls who ran to the door at every knock. Just two sisters sitting at the table, whispering to each other while coloring with markers. And Daniel, he wasn't just their guardian anymore. He was truly part of their lives. The girls started unpacking their things. They didn't have much, really, but for the first time, they unpacked without that feeling of, "We won't be here long." Clothes went into drawers. Sophie placed her favorite toy by the head of her bed. Emma decorated a shelf with her drawings. The apartment started to actually feel like home. It smelled like laundry, soap, hot cocoa, and children's laughter all mixed into one warm scent. Some mornings now, Daniel found himself witnessing their little sibling arguments. "You touched my toothbrush." It was silly stuff, but it meant the world to him. Because things weren't just structured anymore. They were alive. School had to start. Daniel contacted a nearby private school, met with the teachers himself. Laura handled the paperwork. And on the first day, Daniel carried their backpacks and smiled like a real dad. He later admitted to himself that the feeling it gave him, that quiet pride, was something no career achievement had ever given him. Emma adapted quickly. She was quiet, but observant. Sophie was more shy at first, but within a few weeks, her eyes were shining too. And when both girls wrote "Dad" in their notebooks, no one had told them to. It had just happened. Friday nights became family nights. Emma's idea. The rule was simple: pizza, movies, and pajamas. Phones off. On the first night, they burned the pizza. Sophie laughed and called it crispy crust. Daniel laughed too. Years ago, burning food would have been a crisis. Now, it was just a joke. One evening, during a walk, Emma reached up and took his hand. "Do you ever miss being alone?" she asked. Daniel blinked, surprised, then crouched down to meet her eyes. "Being alone and being quiet aren't the same," he said. "I used to be quiet, but I was never at peace. Now you two are loud, but I've never felt calmer. Not once in my life." Emma didn't answer. She just nodded and held his hand tighter. Daniel started going to work less, delegating more, planning less. The company kept growing, but his definition of success had changed. Instead of chasing green lines on a report, he framed a little note Sophie wrote, "Best dad ever." It sat on the corner of his desk, next to a few children's books, Emma's drawing of a bird, and a torn notebook page where Sophie had written, "Sometimes life starts in the most unexpected place." A year later, a new wall appeared in the house. The man who once avoided photos now had colorful frames lining the wall. A picture from a picnic, a school play moment, under a tree, 3 people, one trying to eat ice cream, one laughing out loud, one not even realizing how happy he looked. Sophie stared at the wall one day and asked, "Is this our family wall now?" Daniel nodded. Emma ran to her room and came back with a drawing. 3 people holding hands, and underneath it, written in big, bold letters, "The Grayson family." When they hung that drawing on the wall, Daniel felt something settle inside him. Not something new, just something that had always been missing. One afternoon, while sitting at a cafe, a woman at the next table looked at the girls and asked, "Are they twins?" Daniel smiled. "No, but they're mine." It was the first time he'd said it like that, and it didn't surprise him anymore. It felt right. It felt true. That night, as they were getting ready for bed, Sophie whispered, "If Mom had loved us, she would have loved you too, right?" Daniel paused, then answered gently, "I think anyone who helped make you this strong, this kind, this brilliant, she'd love them. Absolutely." Sophie smiled. Emma had her eyes closed, but she murmured, "You don't feel like a stranger anymore." The lights went off. Small shoulders sank under the blanket. Breath slowed. Daniel stood quietly at the doorway. And in that moment, he thought, this whole story started at a supermarket. 2 minutes. A hesitation. Maybe the only irrational decision he'd ever made. But that decision gave them a home and gave him a life. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel. Because here, we don't just tell stories, we touch lives.